Hello America. This week I want to talk about something that might at first glance look as though it is simply an internal legal matter for the British, the state of justice in the United Kingdom. But it's not only a British matter. It actually potentially affects the United States also. It affects both our countries because the justice systems of our two nations share a common ancestor. We share the same constitutional parentage, and what happens to British justice ultimately may also matter to the United States as well. Similarly, of course, what happens in the United States often affects us here. Most Americans know that your jury system is old. Fewer perhaps realise just how old it is and where it came from. And indeed, you inherited it from us, from the British. But where did we get it? Well, in 1215, the English barons rebelled against King John's arbitrary and heavy-handed rule. They forced him to sign a royal charter to address their grievances regarding extortionate taxation, land rights, and the inequality of justice. That charter established the principle that everyone, including the king, was subject to the law, and it laid the foundation of individual liberties and the supremacy of law. Indeed, its principles went on to inspire legal systems and rights around the globe, including in your own United States in the form of the American Bill of Rights. That charter became known as the Magna Carta, or Great Charter. Now, this isn't a history lesson, but that's relevant because right here, written into the political DNA of the English-speaking world, is the idea that no man may lose his liberty except by the lawful judgment of his peers. It is one of the oldest safeguards of individual freedom on earth. It is the foundation upon which both our democracies built their legitimacy. So when Britain begins to dismantle its own jury system, not quietly, not accidentally, but quite deliberately, perhaps you in America should be paying attention. Because when a nation starts unravelling the very instrument that keeps the state honest, the consequences may well reach far beyond its borders. You see, Britain's new Justice Secretary, David Lammy, this week proposed that he would strip away centuries of precedent by limiting the right to trial by jury. Under his plan, and at the moment it is only a proposal, jury trials would be guaranteed only for the most serious offences such as rape, murder, manslaughter or homicide, or for cases that pass a vaguely defined public interest test, and it'll be for officials and politicians to decide what exactly that means. Everything else could be diverted into a new tier of jury-less courts. Well, let me put that another way. If the Justice Secretary succeeds in pushing this through, a British citizen could now be tried, convicted and punished, sentenced, without ever facing a jury simply because a politician, a minister, or an anonymous, unaccountable official decides that their case does not deserve one. This is a profound constitutional shift. It is not an administrative reform or efficiency. It is not modernisation. It is a fundamental and structural rebalancing of the relationship of the people with the state. The right to be judged by one's peers is not simply a procedural footnote. It is the mechanism, the very mechanism that ensures that justice is not something done to the people, but something done by the people. Juries act as a democratic circuit breaker, if you like, a barrier that prevents the state from acting as investigator, accuser, judge and executioner simultaneously. If this were happening in isolation, it would be alarming enough. But it isn't. It's happening at the same time as a series of other crises and failures in our justice system. It indicates a very deep set of problems. In recent months, we have seen prisoners being released early simply because the prisons are full. Record numbers of prisoners are being mistakenly released, including violent offenders. Dangerously low conviction rates across a range of crimes are even getting worse. A growing perception of two-tier policing, in other words, operational policing according to political agendas and targets rather than the principle, as established by the Magna Carta in 1215, that everyone is equal before the law. And we've got such a backlog in the courts that even rape victims are having to wait for 4 or 5 years before having their case heard. And if that was not bad enough, we also learned this week something very concerning indeed. West Midlands Police, the second largest police force in the country, fabricated intelligence to justify banning Israeli football fans from attending a match between the clubs Maccabi Tel Aviv and Aston Villa in Birmingham, in an area predominantly inhabited by Muslims. West Midlands Police claimed in a report that Israeli football fans had caused violent disorder at a football match in Amsterdam a year before. However, the Dutch police who policed that match have now stated publicly that that was simply not true. That what West Midlands Police say happened, well, they don't recognise the events described by the British police. Now stop for a moment and consider what that actually means. A British police force, historically regarded around the world as one of the most impartial and trusted, produced false intelligence to justify a political, and it has to be said, an anti-Semitic decision. This incident is not simply a story in a newspaper. It is a symptom, as all these things are, of an incredibly dangerous disease. For almost 2 centuries, British policing has operated on a single moral foundation: policing by consent, without fear or favour. It has not been perfect, of course, but it has been principled. It has been admired globally, and it has understood its role. And it's understood that role to serve the law, not the political winds of the moment. But over the past couple of decades, something has changed. Policing in Britain has become politicised. Something subtly, sometimes subtly, sometimes blatantly, sometimes willingly, sometimes under pressure, but always in the same direction, away from impartiality, but towards alignment with prevailing political or activist sentiments. The priorities shifted from applying the law fairly towards pleasing particular interest groups or politicians. The police are increasingly more interested in appeasing people who disregard the law than in being seen to act in a moral, courageous and proper way when enforcing it without fear or favour. That change has been highly damaging. 30 years ago, policing was the most respected profession in British society. Police officers were trusted. But public trust is now collapsing. And when you place all of these developments side by side, the erosion of jury trials, the politicisation of the police, the administrative failures of prisoner releases that shouldn't have happened, the falsified intelligence, the early releases where they should have happened, but only because prisons are full, the delay in the courts, a single, unarguable pattern emerges, and that is that the British state is gradually replacing its justice system, deeply rooted in public consent and public participation and equality, with one rooted in political and managerial discretion. This is not a conspiracy, it's not a coup. I'm not trying to suggest that. But it is something far more insidious and mundane, and therefore perhaps more dangerous. It is political and administrative expedience disguised as pragmatic modernisation. Somewhere along the line, Britain stopped treating justice as a constitutional principle and started treating it as an operational inconvenience or a political irritation. It should be clear, this is not only a British problem, it is a Western problem. The same erosion of standards, the same collapse in institutional confidence, the same political capture of operational systems is happening elsewhere as well. In your own country, in the United States of America, the land of the free, you have also long been wrestling with your versions of these same issues. Politicised prosecutors, selective enforcement, loss of public trust in impartial law, chronic court delays, pressure to avoid jury trials in favour of plea bargaining, justice systems overwhelmed by political conflict rather than guided by moral principle. Our two nations, Great Britain and the United States, we share the same constitutional inheritance, the same democratic instincts and the same vulnerabilities. What makes the change here in Britain so significant isn't simply the impact for the British people, but if Britain, the very birthplace of common law, weakens the right to trial by jury, you can be absolutely certain that some of your own legislators in the United States, or in the executive there in America, may get ideas that they too can try to expand political control of your justice system. And that, I would suggest, would not end well. Justice is not simply a pillar of democracy, it is the very foundation on which all of the other pillars are built. Once justice becomes unequal, administratively pragmatic, or politically convenient, the rule of law ceases to be a guarantee and becomes a potential tool of authoritarian politicians. A nation can survive bad policies, bad politicians even. It can survive economic shocks. It can even survive incompetence. But it cannot survive the collapse of public faith in the fairness of the rule of law and the justice system. Because when people stop believing that justice is equal, they will stop accepting its outcomes. And when they stop accepting its outcomes, the entire democratic compact begins to fracture. America. The British are not by nature a dramatic people. We do not tend to declare constitutional crises, and we don't usually speak in theatrical or dramatic tones. But this moment does demand clear-sighted honesty. You cannot remove ancient constitutional and judicial safeguards, politicise policing, tolerate operational failures, and then pretend that justice remains functional. You cannot restrict jury trials and still claim to uphold the rights established by the Magna Carta in 1218, over 800 years ago. The right to be judged by one's peers, your own peers, is not a luxury. It is the line between a nation governed by the rule of law and a nation governed at the whim and by the convenience of its rulers. Good night.
That was Letter to America by Henry Bolton. For further episodes, please follow or subscribe. Thank you.